March 1898, Friedrichsruh, 40 kilometers east of Hamburg. Behind iron gates, a sprawling estate stretches across 1,500 acres of Saxon forest, the Saxonwald. The main residence, a modest hunting lodge transformed into a monument, 47 rooms, 23 servants. Annual maintenance costs equivalent to $2.3 million in today's currency. But inside those walls, a family is suffocating under the weight of a name too large to carry. The Iron Chancellor is dead. His fortune depleted, his sons failures. His legacy, a burden that will consume 3 generations. How does the most powerful dynasty in German history collapse in full public view? Stand at the entrance to Friedrichsruh today, and you'll see the forest first. Ancient oaks tower overhead, their branches filtering the pale northern light into cathedral shadows. The Bismarck estate sits in the heart of this woodland realm, the Saxonwald, a 1,500-acre gift from Kaiser Wilhelm I to Otto von Bismarck in 1871, not a purchase. A gift for unifying Germany. The numbers tell one story. The main residence contains 47 rooms spread across 3 floors of Saxon stone and timber. A billiard room with ceilings painted to resemble the night sky. A library holding 14,000 volumes in 8 languages. Stables for 30 horses. Greenhouses cultivating orchids imported from the colonies. At its peak, 23 full-time servants maintained the property. Groundskeepers, cooks, stable hands, maids, foresters managing timber operations across the estate. Walk through the entrance hall, and portraits stare down from every wall. Otto von Bismarck in military dress. Bismarck in diplomatic robes. Bismarck on horseback. Bismarck with the Kaiser. The Iron Chancellor, the man who crushed Austria, humiliated France, and forged an empire from 39 squabbling states. His face is everywhere. His presence, inescapable. The estate cost 350,000 gold marks to acquire and renovate in 1871, roughly $8.5 million today. Annual operational expenses ran to 45,000 marks by the 1890s. That's $1.1 million per year, just to keep the fires burning and the staff paid. For a family whose wealth came not from industry or banking, but from government salary, royal gifts, and timber sales. But here's what the portraits don't show. By 1895, 3 years before the old man's death, the Bismarck family was already drowning in debt. The timber revenues couldn't cover the bills. The investments were failing. And the 2 sons Herbert and Wilhelm were catastrophically unsuited to manage money, estates, or their own lives. Beneath the grandeur, the arithmetic was turning brutal. The servants whispered. Hamburg bankers grew nervous. And Otto von Bismarck, the man who once dictated terms to emperors, was quietly selling off assets, forests, securities, family heirlooms to maintain the illusion of dynasty. He knew the truth. The palace wasn't sustainable. The name was a weight, not a crown. How did the family that unified Germany become too weak to hold itself together? To understand the collapse, you must return to the origin. Not to wealth, but to ambition. Otto von Bismarck was born in 1815 to Junker aristocracy, Prussian landed gentry, with more land than liquidity. His father, a modest estate owner. His mother, bourgeois, educated, ambitious. The family had status but not fortune. Young Otto grew up resenting poverty, disguised as nobility. He watched his mother scrimp. He saw how aristocratic pride couldn't pay debts. This childhood shaped everything. When Bismarck entered politics in the 1850s, he wasn't driven by ideology, but by hunger for power, for recognition, for permanent security. He maneuvered through the Prussian court with ruthless clarity. By 1862, King Wilhelm I appointed him minister-president. Bismarck's mission: solve the constitutional crisis, expand Prussia, and crush any obstacle in his path. He succeeded through 3 wars in 8 years. Denmark fell in 1864. Austria collapsed in 1866. France was humiliated in 1871. And on January 18, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the German Empire was proclaimed. Bismarck, its architect. The rewards flowed immediately. Kaiser Wilhelm I gifted him the Sachsenwald, 1,500 acres of premium forest, generating income from timber sales. The estate at Friedrichsruh came with it. Bismarck also received 400,000 gold marks in cash, which he invested in railways, bonds, and industrial stocks. For the first time in his life, he was genuinely wealthy. But Bismarck didn't just want wealth, he wanted dynasty. He wanted his name carved into German history so deeply that his descendants would inherit power automatically. He transformed Friedrichsruh from a hunting lodge into a symbol. He commissioned expansions: the library wing in 1875, the greenhouse complex in 1878, the stable renovations in 1881. Every addition whispered permanence. The architect was Wilhelm Below, known for solid traditional designs. No avant-garde experiments. Bismarck wanted Friedrichsruh to look like it had stood for centuries, like old Prussian money, like dynasty. Thick walls, heavy timbers, stone foundations sunk deep. Construction costs spiraled 50,000 marks over budget, but Bismarck never flinched. This was investment in immortality. His two sons, Herbert and Wilhelm, were raised inside this monument to their father's greatness. Herbert, the eldest, was groomed for diplomacy. Brilliant, arrogant, loyal to his father to the point of obsession. Wilhelm, the younger, gentle and artistic, studied law but showed no aptitude for power. Otto von Bismarck loved them fiercely but never let them escape his shadow. He envisioned a future. Herbert would enter the Foreign Office, rise through the ranks, perhaps become Chancellor himself. Wilhelm would manage the estates, oversee the timber operations, ensure financial stability. Together, they would perpetuate the Bismarck name. They didn't know it yet, but Otto's dismissal from power in 1890 would shatter this vision entirely. And neither son possessed the tools to rebuild. The first cracks appeared not in public, but in the household ledgers. By 1890, when Kaiser Wilhelm II dismissed Otto von Bismarck from the chancellorship, the family's financial situation was already strained. The timber income from the Sachsenwald generated approximately 35,000 marks annually, decent revenue, but insufficient for the lifestyle Otto had constructed. The estate required 45,000 marks per year in operational costs, salaries for 23 servants, coal for winter heating, 6 tons per month, maintenance on 47 rooms, upkeep on greenhouses, stables and forest infrastructure. The gap, 10,000 marks per year, $240,000 annually in today's currency. That shortfall had to come from somewhere. Initially, it came from Otto's investments. He had placed his 1871 reward money into railway stocks and government bonds. But Otto von Bismarck, for all his political genius, was a terrible investor. He panicked during market downturns. He sold low and bought high. By 1892, his portfolio had lost a third of its value. The dividends that once covered the estate's deficit had evaporated. So Otto began selling timber. Not sustainable harvests, emergency clearcuts. Sections of the Sachsenwald that should have matured for another decade were felled and sold to Hamburg lumber merchants at distressed prices. The forest, his gift from the Kaiser, was being liquidated to pay the bills. Inside Friedrichsruh, the servants noticed. The household staff, once 23, was reduced to 18 by 1895. Meals became simpler. Repairs were deferred. The orchids in the greenhouse, Otto's pride, began to wilt as heating costs were cut. But the true burden wasn't financial, it was psychological. Herbert von Bismarck, the eldest son, had served as his father's deputy during the chancellorship. When Otto was dismissed in 1890, Herbert resigned in solidarity, a noble gesture that destroyed his career. He was 41 years old, unemployed, unemployable. The Kaiser despised him. And trapped at Friedrichsruhe, watching his father decline. Herbert never married. He had fallen in love with Princess Elizabeth of Karolaf-Beuthen, but Otto had forbidden the match, deeming her divorced status unacceptable. Herbert obeyed. He spent the next 30 years bitter, alcoholic, and nursing grievances. He managed nothing. He contributed nothing. He existed as a monument to filial loyalty and wasted potential. Wilhelm von Bismarck, the younger son, tried to escape. He married in 1885, moved to a smaller estate, attempted to live independently, but Otto's gravitational pull was too strong. Wilhelm was summoned constantly to Friedrichsruhe, guilted into managing affairs he didn't understand, and criticized relentlessly for his lack of political ambition. His marriage frayed. His health deteriorated. By the mid-1890s, Wilhelm was suffering from severe depression and anxiety. The servants at Friedrichsruhe whispered about shouting matches between father and sons, about Otto's rages when bills arrived, about Herbert drinking alone in the library until dawn, about Wilhelm weeping in the forest. The dynasty was cannibalizing itself, and then there was the public cost. Otto von Bismarck, even in retirement, was Germany's most famous man. Every financial struggle became newspaper fodder. When creditors sued over unpaid timber contracts in 1896, the trial was front-page news. When the family sold a collection of royal gifts at auction in 1897, the press called it the liquidation of German greatness. The Bismarcks were falling in public view. Otto tried to maintain appearances. He gave interviews projecting confidence. He hosted visiting dignitaries at Friedrichsruhe. But behind closed doors, he was reviewing loan documents and signing promissory notes. The man who had dictated peace treaties to France was now negotiating payment plans with Hamburg bankers. The arithmetic had turned brutal. The estate cost more to maintain than it generated. The sons were broken. The investments had failed. And Otto von Bismarck, 83 years old, in 1898, knew he was leaving his descendants a poisoned inheritance. On July 30th, 1898, Otto von Bismarck died at Friedrichsruhe. His last words, reportedly, "Forward, but forward to what?" Herbert von Bismarck inherited everything: the estate, the debts, the name. And he was spectacularly unequipped to manage any of it. Within 6 months of Otto's death, the full scope of the financial disaster became clear. The estate owed 280,000 marks to creditors, about $6.7 million today. Timber contracts were in breach. Servants' wages were months overdue. The Sachsenwald forests had been so over-harvested that timber revenues would take 15 years to recover. Herbert's solution: sell everything that wasn't nailed down. Between 1899 and 1904, the Bismarck family liquidated assets in waves. First went the securities portfolio, bonds and stocks, sold at depressed prices, realizing losses of 40%. Then personal items: Otto's diplomatic correspondence, purchased by the Prussian state, military decorations sold to private collectors, even furniture from Friedrichsruhe, auctioned in Hamburg. The German public watched in horror. Newspapers ran editorials lamenting the humiliation of a national hero's family. Cartoonists depicted Herbert as a drunk pawning his father's medals. The Kaiser, Wilhelm II, who had despised both Otto and Herbert, did nothing. No royal bailout, no state intervention. The Bismarcks were on their own. But the crisis wasn't just financial, it was generational. Wilhelm von Bismarck, the younger brother, died in 1901 at age 51. The official cause: heart failure. The real cause: exhaustion, depression, and the crushing weight of a name he never wanted. His children, 4 of them, inherited nothing but debts and the obligation to uphold the Bismarck legacy. Herbert, now alone at Friedrichsruhe, spiraled deeper into alcoholism. He gave rambling interviews to newspapers, attacking the Kaiser, praising his father, and blaming everyone but himself for the family's collapse. In 1902, he was briefly committed to a sanatorium after a public breakdown in Hamburg. The Iron Chancellor's heir, mentally shattered, financially ruined, publicly humiliated. And here's the broader context: the Bismarcks weren't alone. Across Germany, dozens of aristocratic families were collapsing simultaneously. The economic forces that sustained Junker estates, agricultural protections, cheap labor, timber revenues were eroding. Industrialization was shifting wealth to urban centers. New tax laws, introduced in the 1890s, imposed progressive income taxes on estates. The old aristocracy was being financially liquidated by modernity. But the Bismarck collapse was uniquely public because the name was uniquely famous. Every auction, every debt, every scandal was national news. The dynasty that unified Germany was now a cautionary tale about the fragility of greatness. By 1904, Herbert had sold half the Sachsenwald forests to industrial timber companies. The estate at Friedrichsruh was mortgaged to Hamburg banks. The household staff was reduced to 8. Rooms were closed off to save on heating. The greenhouses were abandoned, the orchids long dead. Herbert von Bismarck died on September 18, 1904, at age 56. Cause of death: liver failure from alcoholism. He never married. He had no children. The direct male line of Otto von Bismarck ended with him. The estate passed to Wilhelm's children, but they wanted no part of it. One grandson, Otto von Bismarck Jr., tried briefly to manage Friedrichsruh but gave up within 2 years. In 1906, the family began negotiations to sell the entire property. The Bismarck dynasty, forged in 3 wars and crowned in the Hall of Mirrors, lasted exactly 35 years before financial reality crushed it. But then something unexpected happened. In 1919, the Weimar Republic government stepped in, not to bail out the family, but to preserve the site. Friedrichsruh, despite its debts and dysfunction, had become a pilgrimage site. Germans traveled from across the country to visit the Iron Chancellor's home. The forest walks where Bismarck had pondered policy. The library where he had written his memoirs. The bedroom where he had died. The estate was national mythology made physical.